Hello, welcome back to Good Nightmare. Today's episode I came across in not too unusual a way, but unusual for me because I don't usually find cases in this way. But I've recently started watching Bailey Sarian's YouTube channel. She does Murder, Mystery and Makeup Mondays and does a really good job of presenting cases and giving a bit of speculation, more speculation than I give. I like to keep my episodes nice and short and easily consumable for people who don't necessarily have super long attention spans or a whole lot of time or prefer to listen to a lot of topics in one go. I definitely do recommend checking out Bailey's episode on this same case though, because the way that she presents it is fantastic and she's incredibly entertaining. Today's episode is about a black widow. I think we all know that female serial killers tend to be a little bit more rare and therefore their cases pretty interesting to look into. Margie Velma Barfield, known to her friends and family as Velma, was born in October 1932 in North Carolina. She was one of 9 children. Her family was not particularly well off, especially caring for 9 children plus 2 parents, and unfortunately her home life growing up was turbulent to say the least. Velma claimed that as well as abusing herself, her father would also beat and assault her sisters, and that her mother would never intervene in the abuse. It could be assumed that Lillian, Velma's mother, was also a victim of this abuse. Other relatives would later dispute Velma's claims of abuse or the degree to which she was abused, but her later behaviour and crimes do not stem from a stable childhood. Velma was not aware of her family's situation, that they were poor or not able to afford the finer things, until she attended school, where she was bullied by other students who noted her worn-out clothing and drab looks. Her family did not have the money to afford new or expensive items for their 9 children. And so Velma began to steal cash where she could. She started out by taking coins from her father's pockets, which soon escalated into stealing $80 from a neighbour who reported the theft to her father. This was allegedly the last time she stole money as a child or teen after her father punished her for the act, a punishment that was beyond what any reasonable parent would do. Velma dropped out of high school at 17 years old and married her high school sweetheart Thomas Burke in order to escape her home and her father's abuse. The pair had 2 children and were apparently quite happy until an unfortunate and devastating turn of events. Velma had been working at a mill, but had to leave her job due to medical issues, which eventually led to her having a hysterectomy. As a result of the surgery, she was left with chronic back pain that led her to use and then abuse prescription painkillers. Her husband Thomas also suffered when he was involved in a car accident and received a head injury that would apparently change his personality. He began to drink heavily and often, and the once happy pair fell into a tumultuous relationship, both suffering with addiction. In 1969, Thomas and Velma fought, and Velma took their 2 children and left the home to stay elsewhere. While Velma was away, the couple's house mysteriously caught fire, killing Thomas and only causing damage to the room in which he was located at the time of his death. The death was not deemed suspicious, and so Velma moved forward and waited for her insurance money to come through. About a year later, Velma was dating a man named Jennings Barfield, who had also lost his previous partner. This relationship was no walk in the park either, and after another big argument, Jennings began to complain of feeling unwell. Shortly after, he died of a heart attack. This was a tragic ending to Velma's second relationship, but her bad luck wouldn't end there. Again, the death was not suspicious, as he had died of natural causes. After moving home to her parents' house again, being without a husband or income and waiting for her insurance money to come through, Velma's father died of lung cancer, and her mother became ill. Velma became her mother's caretaker and also began to look for work as a caretaker in her local area in order to support herself and her children. She was employed by two separate couples who became ill while under her care and eventually died. There was a black cloud seeming to follow Velma wherever she went. Stuart Taylor was the next man to fall in love with Velma. However, by this time, Velma's old habit of stealing money from others had not only resurfaced, but was much more obvious. She'd been forging checks from his checkbook and stealing cash. Stuart found out about the forgeries after confronting her about the missing checks, and shortly after, you guessed it, he became mysteriously ill, and after being nursed by Velma unsuccessfully, he was taken to a hospital, where he later succumbed to his illness. Stuart's death was particularly suspicious, and so an autopsy was completed in which it was found that he had been poisoned with arsenic. Velma had been mixing rat poison into his beer and his tea. Looking back, there was a definitive pattern of men mistreating Velma or discovering her thefts, and her doing away with the evidence, in this case being the people that she stole from. When Velma went to trial for the death of Stuart, she pleaded insanity initially, but as we all know, that is not an easy plea to win, I guess. But this was not granted, and instead she was sentenced to death. She apparently applauded the district attorney after his closing speech and appeared aloof and uncaring throughout the trial, which may have influenced the jury toward their ultimate recommendation of the death sentence. After her conviction, Velma confessed to the murders of her first husband, second, and her mother. She'd poisoned her victims in order to become their caretakers and to be able to then more easily steal from them and take advantage of them, eventually killing them. While on death row, Velma was no longer taking the painkillers she'd been addicted to. She claimed that they were the cause of her behaviour and her decisions to harm others, and that she'd become a born-again Christian while on death row. She spent the next 6 years on death row, where she would counsel other female inmates. There were several appeals during her time, but none of which were successful. As the date of her execution drew near, Velma had no choice but to finally accept her fate. She said of her execution date, "When I go into that chamber at 2 a.m, it's my gateway to heaven." I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Do you think that regardless of the way that her first marriage ended, she would have become a thief? She would have become a murderer? Or did her addiction and her husband's death play a part in creating this pattern? Do you believe that someone who could go from laughing on trial while she's being sentenced to death could really become a born-again Christian in only 6 years? It seems she did change, and she did want to help others. But I wonder if she had never been taken to jail, if she ever would have changed. Let me know your thoughts, or discuss them with your mates and tell them about the podcast. You can catch me on social media at goodnightmare_s on Instagram and Twitter. I will link everything in the show notes, including Bailey Sarian's YouTube channel. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, sweet dreams.